He'd buried the dream of fatherhood beneath snow and silence, but they came with nothing but names and hunger. 3 silver coins changed their fate. One whispered word changed his. Clayton Thorne stepped down from the freight wagon at the edge of Cedar Ridge, Colorado territory, wearing a coat older than most buildings in town. For years, he'd descended from the mountains once each season to trade furs and supplies, then vanish back into the high country before sunrise warmed the ground. But today he lingered. 6 months earlier, a doctor in Fort Collins had delivered news that cut deeper than any blade. Scar tissue, damage from an old war wound, the cold certainty that he'd never father children. The cabin he'd built by hand for a family that would never come now felt like a monument to dreams that had died before they could breathe. The sound of voices drew him toward the churchyard, where a crowd had gathered. A woman in gray stood on the church steps beside 3 small figures huddled together like lost sheep. "Auction today," she called out. 3 children, ages 7, 5, and 3. No surviving kin, no charity placements left. The children stood with coats too thin for spring and eyes too wide for their age. The eldest boy positioned himself protectively in front of his sisters, jaw set in defiance that broke Clayton's heart. The little girl gripped the baby's hands so tightly their knuckles showed white through dirt-stained skin. No one in the crowd moved. No one offered a bid. These weren't the kind of children wealthy families wanted. Too old, too damaged, carrying too much sorrow. $2 for the set, the woman barked, desperation creeping into her voice. Anyone? Silence stretched like a held breath. 3. The word left Clayton's mouth before his mind could catch up. Every head turned. He walked up the church steps, his boots echoing like thunder, and dropped 3 silver coins into the woman's gloved palm. Then he knelt before the children. The boy squared his shoulders like a soldier. "We don't bite," he whispered, voice barely audible but firm as granite. Clayton almost smiled, the first real expression to cross his face in months. "Didn't figure you did." The girl asked softly. "You got a house?" He nodded. "Got food?" He nodded again, seeing desperate hope flicker in her dark eyes. Then he looked at the smallest one. She hadn't spoken a word, just stared up at him with blue eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so small. She blinked once, twice, then whispered something that hit him like lightning. "Papa." The sound struck him like thunder in a clear sky. He hadn't heard that word in years, not aimed at him, not even in dreams. The crowd began to whisper, but Clayton couldn't hear them. He could only hear the soft breath of a little girl who had somehow recognized something in him that he'd thought was buried forever. The woman's face had paled. "She's barely spoken in weeks," she murmured. "No one told her to say that." Clayton didn't speak. He simply reached for the child and picked her up. She nestled against his neck with a sigh that sounded like coming home. The crowd's whispers grew louder. "Crazy old man. He's got no wife, no future." But Clayton couldn't hear them over the sound of 3 small hearts choosing to trust him. "What's your name, mister?" the boy asked. "Clayton Thorne." "I'm Isaac. That's Nora. And the baby is Lily." Clayton filed the names away like precious things. "You ready to see a mountain?" Isaac's chin lifted slightly. "Yes, sir." He'd come to town to forget what he couldn't be. Instead, he was heading back to the mountain with 3 reasons to try again. The borrowed wagon groaned as they climbed the winding trail. Pine trees pressed close on both sides, their branches filtering afternoon sunlight into dancing patches of gold. The air grew thinner, carrying the sharp scent of snow and evergreen. Isaac sat rigid beside him, eyes constantly scanning the forest. Nora had curled up in the wagon bed with Lily, humming something soft that seemed to calm the baby's whimpers. None of them had said much since leaving town, but Clayton could feel their watchful hope. As the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, they crested the last ridge. Below them, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, sat Clayton's cabin. Built with his own hands 7 years ago, it had waited all this time for this moment. "It's big," Nora whispered, wonder in her voice. "Big enough," Clayton replied, pulling the wagon to a stop. He helped them down one by one, their small hands cold in his weathered palms. Lily clung to his neck when he lifted her, reluctant to be set down. Inside, he lit the oil lamps while the children stood in the main room, taking in their new world with careful attention. The interior was simple but well made. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flanked by shelves lined with books and carved wooden animals. A sturdy table sat in the center, surrounded by chairs he'd made himself. A ladder led to a loft that could serve as sleeping space. "You hungry?" Clayton asked, though he could see the answer in their hollow cheeks. Three small heads nodded in unison. He made what he knew: venison stew with potatoes and wild onions. Simple food, but filling and warm. As it simmered, he arranged bedrolls in the loft. When supper was ready, they ate in careful silence, the children making the meal last as long as possible. "It's good," Isaac said finally. "Real good," Nora added, and for the first time Clayton saw her smile. After supper, he helped them settle in the loft. The space was cozy, with a small window that looked out over the valley and thick curtains to keep out the cold. "Will you stay?" Nora asked as he tucked a blanket around Lily. "Tonight, so we know you're here?" When was the last time someone had wanted him to stay anywhere? "I'll be right downstairs," he promised. But as he started toward the ladder, Lily's voice stopped him. "Papa?" She held out her arms, and he climbed back up to gather her close. She whispered something against his chest, words too soft to understand, but the meaning was clear. Safety. Home. As Clayton sat in the warm lamplight with a child who had chosen to call him father, he felt something broken beginning to heal. Tomorrow would bring challenges, questions about guardianship, whispers in town. But tonight, in the glow of firelight, with 3 small heartbeats settling into sleep above him, Clayton allowed himself to believe in second chances. The mountain wind sang lullabies around the cabin eaves, and for the first time in years, Clayton Thorne wasn't alone. 3 days later, the morning arrived without warning, sunlight creeping across the cabin like it was afraid to wake what it didn't understand. Clayton stirred from his chair by the fire, neck stiff, boots still on, a blanket he didn't remember pulling over himself sliding to the floor. He blinked slowly, eyes drawn to the small figures curled together near the dying embers. They were still here. It wasn't a fever dream brought on by mountain solitude. 3 children, his now, or something like it. They hadn't run in the night, hadn't cried themselves sick with fear. They'd simply folded into the cabin like they belonged. Isaac was already awake, standing by the window like he'd been waiting for trouble. The boy didn't sleep easy. Clayton had heard him shifting and muttering through the night, caught in dreams that sounded more like battles. "You're not taking us back," Isaac said. Not a question, but a quiet challenge. Like he already knew what people did when they changed their minds about unwanted children. "No," Clayton said simply, moving to the stove. "You eat, then you help." Isaac nodded once, something loosening in his thin shoulders. The boy understood work, understood earning his keep. That was good. The mountain didn't suffer the lazy. Nora sat up next, her dark hair tangled like a bird's nest, eyes squinting against the morning light. She looked around the cabin as if seeing it for the first time, taking in the carved animals on the shelves, the thick quilts, the solid walls that didn't shake when the wind blew. "Everything still tastes like oatmeal," she muttered, though there was less venom in it than the day before. Clayton almost smiled as he ladled porridge into wooden bowls. "Got berries to go with it today." That got her attention. When was the last time these children had tasted something sweet? Lily crawled into his lap before he'd even sat down, her small arms wrapping around his waist like she'd always belonged there. She looked up at him with those impossibly blue eyes and whispered, "Papa hungry too?" The words hit him like a physical blow. Papa. She kept saying it, kept looking at him like she knew something he'd forgotten about himself. Clayton's throat worked around words that wouldn't come, so he just nodded and shared his porridge with her, 1 spoonful for him, 1 for her, until the bowl was empty and she was giggling. After breakfast, he put them to work. Isaac followed him outside where the chicken coop needed mending after the winter storms. Clayton handed him a hammer, watched how the boy studied the broken boards with careful attention. "You know your way around tool," Clayton observed. Isaac shrugged. "Pa taught me some, before ... The boy's voice trailed off, but Clayton didn't push. Everyone had befores they didn't want to talk about. He just showed Isaac how to set the nails, how to swing the hammer so it drove true. Nora wandered outside next, dragging a broom twice her size. She attacked the front porch with the fury of a woman scorned, muttering about dust and boys being no help. Clayton let her mutter, let her stomp around like a tiny tornado. The girl had fire in her, and fire was useful if you knew how to tend it right. But when she tripped over a loose board and scraped her elbow, he was there before the tears could fall. She winced but didn't flinch when he knelt to examine the scrape. "My real papa used to carry peppermints in his pocket," she said suddenly. Clayton's hand stilled. "I don't have those." She shrugged. "You got berries, and you fixed my hurt. That counts." By evening, they'd settled into something that almost felt like routine. Clayton cooked supper, venison and potatoes with wild greens. The children ate like they were afraid the food might disappear, but slower than the night before, with less desperate hunger. As the fire crackled and shadows danced on the walls, Clayton found himself watching them openly. Isaac helped Nora without being asked. Nora made sure Lily got the softest bits, and Lily kept glancing at him like she was making sure he was still there. "You got any stories?" Nora asked as they finished eating. "What kind of stories?" "The kind where nobody dies," Isaac said quietly, and Clayton's chest tightened at the pain in those young eyes. So he told them about the mountains in winter, about the way snow could fall so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, but how the trees would show you the way home if you knew how to read them. He told them about the family of foxes that lived in the rocks behind the cabin. Lily fell asleep against his chest halfway through, her breathing soft and even. Nora's eyes grew heavy, but she fought sleep like it was an enemy. Isaac listened with the intensity of someone memorizing every word. When Clayton finally carried Lily up to the loft, she stirred just enough to whisper, "Papa tell more stories tomorrow?" "Yeah, sweetheart," he said, surprised by how easily the endearment came. "Tomorrow." But tomorrow came with trouble. Clayton woke to unnatural silence. No birds calling, no wind in the trees, no small sounds of animals going about their morning business. Just the kind of quiet that meant something was wrong. He slipped from his bedroll and moved to the window. Nothing moved in the clearing, but the hair on the back of his neck stood up anyway. Someone was out there, watching. He dressed quickly and stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand but not raised. The morning mist clung to the ground like spirits reluctant to leave, and the air tasted of snow despite the spring warmth. That's when he saw it. Nailed to the oak tree at the edge of the clearing was a piece of paper, the edges fluttering in the breeze. Clayton's blood turned to ice water. He'd lived alone on this mountain for 7 years, and no one came up here without him knowing about it first. He approached the tree slowly, every sense alert. The paper was crude, the writing scrawled in charcoal. "They ain't yours. Don't forget it." Clayton ripped the note down, his jaw clenching hard enough to crack teeth. Someone had been here in the night, close enough to the cabin to nail this warning to his tree, close enough to hurt the children if they'd wanted to. The sound of the door opening made him spin around. Isaac stood on the porch, barefoot and shirtless, but holding a piece of firewood like a club. "What is it?" the boy asked, eyes scanning the tree line. Clayton folded the note and tucked it into his pocket. "Nothing you need to worry about." But Isaac was too smart to buy that lie. Someone was here. It wasn't a question. The boy had probably been awake, listening, when the intruder came calling. "Yeah," Clayton admitted. "Someone was here." Isaac's grip tightened on the firewood. "They coming back?" Clayton looked at the boy, really looked at him. Skinny as a rail, probably hadn't had a full belly in months, but standing there ready to fight for what little safety he'd found. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but if they do, we'll be ready." The rest of the morning passed in tense preparation. Clayton checked his ammunition, cleaned his rifle, and showed Isaac how to load the old shotgun he kept for emergencies. Nora sensed the change in mood and kept Lily close, singing soft songs to keep the baby calm. But it was Isaac who asked the question that had been gnawing at Clayton all morning. "Why don't they want us to stay?" Clayton paused in his cleaning of the rifle barrel. "How did you explain to a 7-year-old that some people saw children as property, as things to be owned rather than loved?" "Some folks," he said carefully, "think they got a say in things that ain't their business." "Like us?" "Like you." Isaac was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then, What if they try to take us back? Clayton set down the rifle and looked the boy straight in the eye. They'll have to go through me first. The simple certainty in his voice seemed to settle something in Isaac. The boy nodded once, then went back to helping Nora sweep the cabin. But as the day wore on, Clayton found his attention drawn to smaller things. The way Lily laughed when she discovered the carved wooden animals on his shelves. How Nora hummed while she worked, the same tune over and over, like a prayer. The careful way Isaac watched him, learning, cataloging every word and gesture. They were settling in, these three small souls, making the cabin warmer just by being in it. And Clayton was surprised to find that the protective fury he'd felt at the threatening note wasn't fading. It was growing stronger. That evening, as they sat around the fire after supper, Lily climbed into his lap again and rested her head against his shoulder. "Papa's scared," she asked so quietly only he could hear. Clayton thought about lying, about telling her everything was fine. But these children had probably heard enough lies from adults who were supposed to protect them. "A little," he admitted. She patted his chest with one small hand. "Lily, keep Papa safe." And looking down at her serious little face, at Isaac sharpening a stick by the fire, at Nora mending a tear in her dress with careful stitches, Clayton realized something that should have terrified him, but instead filled him with grim determination. He would kill anyone who tried to take them away. The mountain wind picked up as night fell, howling around the cabin's eaves like a living thing. But inside, warmed by fire and the sound of children's breathing, Clayton Thorne kept watch and planned for war. Because whoever had left that note had made one critical mistake. They'd threatened his family, and Clayton Thorne had just discovered he was the kind of man who would burn the world down to protect what was his. 1 week later, 3 days passed in careful routine. Clayton kept his rifle close, his eyes on the tree line, and his ears tuned to every sound that didn't belong. The children sensed his vigilance, but didn't question it. They'd learned early that when adults got quiet and watchful, smart children did the same. It was Lily who saw the stranger first. Clayton was outside splitting wood when her voice called from the porch, tight with uncertainty. "Papa, man coming!" Clayton's axe froze mid-swing. He followed her pointing finger to where the trail emerged from the forest, and his blood turned cold. A lone rider was approaching, moving slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. "Isaac," Clayton said quietly, not taking his eyes off the stranger. "Get your sisters inside. Now!" The boy was up and moving before the words finished leaving Clayton's mouth, scooping Lily off the porch and calling for Nora. Clayton heard the cabin door slam as he walked toward the approaching rider, axe still in his hand. The man who dismounted at the edge of the clearing looked like trouble wrapped in a dusty coat. Medium height, lean build, with pale eyes that held too much intelligence and not enough conscience. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, and he moved with the fluid grace of someone comfortable with violence. "Afternoon," the stranger said, his voice carrying a hint of Eastern refinement. "Name's Cal Brennan. Heard you might have room for a traveler." Clayton didn't lower the axe. "Heard wrong." Cal's thin lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Now that's not very neighborly. Man could freeze to death on these mountain trails." "It's May," Clayton pointed out, "and you look plenty warm to me." The stranger chuckled, but his eyes remained cold. They flicked toward the cabin, taking in the freshly mended chicken coop, the children's clothes hanging on the line, the toys Isaac had left scattered on the porch. "Interesting setup you got here," Cal said. "Domestic life suits you?" "Don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do." Cal's hand rested casually on the butt of his revolver. "Word travels fast in small towns. Mountain hermit suddenly playing daddy to 3 orphans. Makes a man curious about motives." Clayton's grip tightened on the axe handle. "My motives ain't your business." "Maybe not, but the children," Cal shrugged. "Well, that's different, isn't it? Children belong with family. Real family. They got family." "Do they?" Cal took a step closer, his boots crunching on the pine needles. "Because from what I heard, you bought them like livestock. $3 for 3 lives. That's not family, friend. That's ownership." The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to cut deep. Clayton had wondered the same thing himself during long nights. Was he their savior or just another man who'd claimed them for his own purposes? But then he remembered Lily's arms around his neck, Isaac's fierce loyalty, Nora's tentative trust. Whatever he'd started as, he was their father now, in every way that mattered. You can think whatever you want, Clayton said, but you can think it's somewhere else. Cal's facade of politeness finally slipped. I don't think you understand the situation here, Thorne. Those children have people looking for them, people with legal claims and long memories. What kind of people? The kind who don't like losing what's theirs. Clayton raised the axe slightly, not quite a threat, but close enough. The children aren't going anywhere. We'll see about that. Cal remounted his horse, settling into the saddle with practiced ease. You might want to consider what's best for them. Mountain life can be dangerous. Accidents happen. Bears, wolves, cliff falls. A lot of ways for people to get hurt up here. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a poison fire. Clayton felt something dark and primitive stir in his chest, the same instinct that had kept him alive through war and 7 years of solitude. Mister, he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, you come around here again, you threaten my family again, and I'll show you just how dangerous mountain life can be. Cal's scarred face split into a genuine grin. There's the man I heard about. The killer who came home from the war and couldn't stop killing. How many men you put in the ground, Thorne? Before Clayton could respond, the stranger spurred his horse and rode back into the forest, leaving only the echo of hoofbeats and the lingering scent of menace. Clayton stood frozen for a long moment, the axe trembling in his white-knuckled grip. How did Cal know about the war, about what he'd done in those dark months after coming home, when the nightmares were too fresh and the whiskey wasn't strong enough to drown them? The next morning, Clayton saddled his horse before dawn. Where are you going, Papa? Lily asked, clinging to his leg as he prepared to mount up. Town, he said, kneeling to her level. Got some business to take care of. Isaac appeared at his shoulder, eyes old beyond his 7 years. What kind of business? Clayton met the boy's gaze steadily. The kind that keeps families together. He left them with strict instructions. Stay inside, keep the shotgun loaded, and if anyone came while he was gone, anyone at all, they were to hide in the root cellar until he returned. The ride to Cedar Ridge took 2 hours, and Clayton spent every minute planning. Cal had known too much about him, about the children, about things that should have been private. That meant someone in town was feeding information to the wrong people. The general store was his first stop. Martha Henley had run the place for 15 years and knew everyone's business, whether they wanted her to or not. Clayton! Martha's weathered face lit up when he walked in. How are the little ones settling in? Fine, Clayton said, not bothering with pleasantries. Martha, anyone been around asking about me? About the children? Her smile faltered. Why? Something wrong? Just answer the question. Martha glanced around the empty store, then leaned closer. There was a man here yesterday, well-dressed, city clothes, said he was looking into the welfare of some orphans who'd been irregularly placed. Clayton's jaw clenched. What did you tell him? Nothing much, Martha said quickly. Just that you seemed to be taking good care of them. But Clayton, he had papers, official-looking documents with seals. What kind of papers? Child welfare, I think. Said there had been complaints about the auction, about children being sold to unmarried men without proper oversight. The walls felt like they were closing in. Clayton had known this might happen, had feared it from the moment he dropped those coins in the churchwoman's palm. Anyone else been asking questions? Martha hesitated. Sheriff Rawlings was in this morning, asked if I'd seen any strangers around, seemed concerned about something. Clayton nodded grimly and walked directly to the sheriff's office. Rawlings was behind his desk, studying a wanted poster with intense concentration. Clayton, the sheriff looked up. Glad you came by. We need to talk. Yeah, we do. Rawlings gestured to a chair, but Clayton remained standing. The sheriff sighed and set the poster aside. I got word from the territorial marshal's office, Rawlings said. Seems there's been some inquiries about a certain mountain man and 3 children. Official inquiries. What kind of official? The kind that come with federal backing and the authority to remove children from homes they deem unsuitable. Rawlings leaned back in his chair. Clayton, you need to understand what you're up against here. These people have lawyers, judges, politicians in their pocket. Why? Clayton asked. Why do they want 3 orphans nobody else gave a damn about? Rawlings was quiet for a long moment. Then, you ever hear of the Brennan family back east? Railroad money, mining interests, political connections going back 3 generations. Clayton's blood turned to ice. Brennan. Cal Brennan is the youngest son. Black sheep of the family, but family nonetheless. Word is, one of those children might be his bloodkin, a niece or nephew from a sister who died in scandal and poverty. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. They don't want the children back out of love. No, Rawlings said grimly. They want them back for respectability. Can't have Brennan blood growing up wild in the mountains with a man who has no legal claim to them. Clayton's hands clenched into fists. Those children have been through enough. They're safe now, happy. They call me father. I know, but the law doesn't always care about what's right, just what's legal. Then I'll make my own law. Rawlings stood, his expression hardening. Clayton, don't do anything stupid. These people have resources you can't imagine. You fight them the wrong way, you'll lose everything, including those children. Then what do you suggest? Get a lawyer. File for legal guardianship. Make this official before they can take them through the courts. Clayton laughed bitterly. With what money? And how long would that take? Weeks? Months? You think they're going to wait for paperwork? Rawlings had no answer for that. Clayton left the sheriff's office with more questions than answers, and a growing certainty that legal remedies wouldn't be enough. As he rode back toward the mountain, he found himself thinking about the war, about skills he'd hoped never to use again. The mountain wind carried the scent of coming storms as he spurred his horse toward home, toward 3 small hearts that trusted him to keep them safe. He wouldn't let them down, no matter what it cost him. The next day, Clayton returned from town with storm clouds gathering behind his eyes and thunder building in his chest. The ride up the mountain had given him time to think, to plan, to remember skills he'd hoped to leave buried with the war. But as his cabin came into view through the pine trees, something was wrong. Too quiet. Even for late afternoon, even with the children under strict orders to stay inside, the silence felt heavy, unnatural. No smoke rose from the chimney. No small voices drifted from the windows. The very air seemed to hold its breath. Clayton dismounted 50 yards from the cabin, rifle already in his hands. His boots made no sound on the pine needles as he approached, every sense alert for danger. The front door hung open like a wound, darkness yawning beyond the threshold. Inside, chaos told the story he didn't want to read. Overturned chairs, Lily's wooden animals scattered across the floor. The shotgun he'd left loaded lying broken near the fireplace. Its stock splintered as if someone had wrestled it away from small hands. But no blood, no bodies, just the terrible absence of the voices that had brought his cabin to life. On the kitchen table, weighted down by a smooth river stone, was a note written in the same crude hand as the warning nailed to his tree. Want them back? Come alone to Devil's Canyon at sunset. Bring papers showing you own them legal-like, or don't come at all. Your choice, old man. Clayton's hand shook as he read the words again. Devil's Canyon, a maze of rock formations and hidden caves, 15 miles south, where the mountain dropped away into shadows that never saw full sunlight. Perfect place for an ambush. Perfect place to make people disappear. He crumpled the note, his mind racing. How many men? How long had they been gone? Were the children hurt, scared, crying for him? The sound of approaching hoofbeats made him freeze. Through the window, he saw Sheriff Rawlings riding up with 3 men in city clothes. Federal marshals, most likely, or worse. Clayton, Rawlings called out. We need to talk. Clayton stepped onto the porch, rifle loose in his hands but ready. Talk fast. The lead rider, a thin man with spectacles and the pale complexion of someone who lived in courtrooms, cleared his throat. Mr. Thorne, I'm Federal Judge Harrison Blackwood. I have here a writ of custody removal, signed by the territorial governor. He held up an official document heavy with seals. The children in your care are to be remanded immediately to their legal guardians, the Brennan family. The children aren't here, Clayton said flatly. Judge Blackwood's eyebrows rose. I beg your pardon? They're gone. Taken. Clayton's voice carried the weight of mountains about to fall. Your legal guardians kidnapped them. Clayton showed them the note. The judge read it twice, his pale face growing paler. This is irregular, Blackwood stammered. The Brennan family assured us they would pursue only legal remedies. The Brennan family lied, Clayton said. Question is, what are you going to do about it? One of the other writers, a man with the build of a professional gunfighter, spoke up. Could be a trick. Man facing legal proceedings might stage something like this. Clayton's rifle came up, not quite pointing at the man, but close enough to make his horse sidestep nervously. Mister, if you're suggesting I'd use 3 children as pawns in some legal game, you'd better be ready to back those words with iron. The gunfighter's hand drifted toward his weapon, but Judge Blackwood held up a restraining hand. If what Mr. Thorne says is true, then this is a matter for law enforcement. Law enforcement takes time, Clayton said. Time those children don't have. He was already moving toward his horse, checking his ammunition, his mind shifting into the cold, calculating mode that had kept him alive through 2 years of killing. Mr. Thorne, Judge Blackwood called, I cannot allow you to take matters into your own hands. Judge, Clayton interrupted, swinging into his saddle, with all due respect, you can take your federal proceedings and file them in hell. Sheriff Rawlings stepped forward. Clayton, what do you need? The question surprised him. Rawlings was risking everything by even asking. Time, Clayton said. Give me until full dark. If I'm not back with those children by then, you can assume I'm dead and proceed however you see fit. Rawlings nodded slowly. You heard him, gentlemen. We wait until dark. Clayton spurred his horse toward the darkening forest, leaving behind the complications of courts and legal documents for the simpler mathematics of violence. Someone had taken his children. Someone was going to pay. The trail to Devil's Canyon wound through country that grew progressively more hostile, loose shale, deadfall, and shadows that seemed to move independently. Clayton knew this country, had hunted it for years, but tonight it felt alien, pregnant with malevolent possibilities. He found their tracks easily enough. 3 horses, one carrying double. Probably one of his children riding with their captor. The hoof prints spoke of haste, of men pushing their mounts harder than was wise. As he crested the ridge overlooking Devil's Canyon, smoke rose from a sheltered hollow where ancient rock falls had created a natural amphitheater. A single campfire, 3 horses picketed nearby, and the faint sound of voices, adult voices, rough and impatient. Clayton left his horse a quarter-mile back and approached on foot, moving through the gathering darkness like a ghost with lethal purpose. The war had taught him patience, had shown him that the difference between life and death often came down to taking that extra moment to observe, to plan. From his concealed position in the rocks above the camp, he could see them clearly. Cal Brennan sat near the fire, that scarred face animated as he spoke to his companions. A fat man with thinning hair counted money from a leather pouch, and a third man, tall and lean with the look of a professional killer, stood guard with a rifle. But where were the children? Then he heard it, a faint whimpering from the direction of a dark cave mouth at the far end of the hollow. One of the men said something Clayton couldn't make out, and Cal laughed, the sound echoing off the canyon walls like breaking glass. Won't be needing them much longer anyway, Cal was saying as Clayton crept closer. Once we get them back east, proper schools, proper families, they'll forget all about their mountain man soon enough. What if he don't come? The fat man asked. Cal shrugged. Then we got ourselves 3 orphans to sell to the highest bidder. Either way, we profit. The casual cruelty in his voice made Clayton's finger tighten on his rifle trigger. These weren't just kidnappers. They were slavers, treating his children like livestock. The guard turned in Clayton's direction, and for a moment their eyes met across 60 yards of canyon floor. The man's mouth opened to shout a warning, but Clayton's rifle spoke first. The bullet took the guard center mass, spinning him around before he collapsed beside the fire. Chaos erupted in the camp. Cal dove for cover behind a boulder, while the fat man scrambled for his weapon. Clayton was already moving, sliding down the rocky slope with fluid grace. Thorn! Cal shouted from behind his rock. That you? Come to collect your bastards? Clayton's answer was another bullet that chipped stone inches from Cal's head. Real sociable, Cal called out. But here's the thing, old man. We got your precious children in that cave. You keep shooting, and bad things might happen to them. The threat froze Clayton's blood. He could hear crying now, definitely coming from the cave. Lily's voice high and terrified, calling for her papa. What do you want, Brennan? What I wanted from the start. You walk away. Leave the children with their rightful family. Nobody else has to die tonight. Clayton emerged from the rocks, rifle still ready but not immediately threatening. Let me see them. Let me see they're safe. Cal gestured to the fat man, who disappeared into the cave. A moment later, he emerged, pushing Isaac ahead of him. The boy's face was streaked with tears and dirt, but he walked steady, his chin up in defiance that made Clayton's heart swell with pride and break with fury. Papa, Isaac called out, his voice cracking. They got Nora and Lily in there. They're scared. I know, son, Clayton said, never taking his eyes off Cal. You're going to be fine. Touching reunion, Cal sneered. But here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn around, walk back to your horse, and ride away. In return, they get to grow up in Philadelphia mansions instead of dying in some mountain winter. And if I refuse? Cal's scarred face split into a grin. Then I put a bullet in the boy's head and start working on the girls. The fat man pressed a pistol to Isaac's temple. The boy didn't flinch, just stared at Clayton with absolute trust, absolute certainty that his papa would save him. Clayton's mind raced through options. He could take Cal, maybe the fat man too, but not before Isaac died. Could he get to the cave? Not without risking their lives. The answer came from Isaac himself. With the desperate cunning of a child who'd learned to survive, he suddenly went limp, becoming dead weight in the fat man's grip. In the split second of confusion that followed, Clayton moved. His first shot took the fat man between the eyes. His second shattered Cal's gun hand as the man tried to bring his weapon to bear. Cal screamed and fell, clutching his ruined fingers. Isaac scrambled away and ran to Clayton, who caught him with his free arm while keeping the rifle trained on Cal. The girls, Clayton said urgently. Where are they? Back of the cave, Isaac gasped. Tied up but not hurt. They're so scared, Papa. Clayton approached Cal, who was writhing in the dirt, cradling his destroyed hand. You're going to call them out, Clayton said, his voice deadly quiet. And if you try anything clever, I'll put the next bullet somewhere that'll take a lot longer to kill you. Cal looked up at him through pain-glazed eyes and saw his own death written there. Nora, he called in a shaking voice. Lily, come out. It's safe. Two small figures emerged from the cave mouth, blinking in the firelight. Nora carried Lily, both girls dirty and tear-streaked but alive, unharmed. They ran to Clayton, who gathered them close with his free arm. Papa came, Lily whispered against his chest. Papa came for us. Always, Clayton said fiercely. Always. Cal struggled to sit up, his face gray with pain. You can't just kill me. There'll be questions, investigations. The federal judge, Clayton interrupted, is going to hear how you kidnapped 3 children and threatened to murder them, how you resisted lawful rescue. Cal's eyes widened in understanding of his position. Clayton could have killed him then, should have perhaps. But with the children watching, with their trust absolute in his goodness, he found he couldn't pull the trigger. Instead, he left Cal bleeding in the dirt, gathered his children, and started the long journey home. When they reached the cabin, Judge Blackwood and his party were still waiting. In the lamplight, the federal judge took one look at the children's tear-streaked faces and Clayton's grim expression. I believe, the judge said carefully, that there may have been some irregularities in the Brennan family's petition. Perhaps it would be best to postpone any custody proceedings. Perhaps it would, Clayton agreed. Later, after the children were fed and bathed and tucked safely into their beds, Clayton sat by the fire with Lily in his lap, her breathing soft against his chest. Bad men gone? She asked. Gone, Clayton confirmed. Papa keep us safe always? Clayton looked down at this little girl who trusted him absolutely, who called him Papa with such certainty, and thought about all the ways the world might try to tear his family apart. Always, he promised. And in the warm glow of the firelight, with his daughters breathing soft against his chest and the mountain winds singing protective songs around their cabin, Clayton Thorne meant every word. 3 months later. 3 months passed in blessed quiet after the Devil's Canyon incident. The Brennan threat had vanished like smoke in mountain wind, leaving behind only whispered stories in Cedar Ridge about the mountain man who'd faced down federal marshals and lived to tell the tale. Clayton didn't encourage the talk, but he didn't discourage it either. Sometimes a reputation for dangerous competence was the best protection a man could have. The children had settled deeper into their new life, with the resilience that only the young possess. Isaac had grown 2 inches and learned to split wood with an axe half his size. Nora had claimed dominion over the cabin's domestic realm, organizing supplies with fierce efficiency, and Lily had bloomed like a wildflower in spring sunshine, her laughter echoing off the canyon walls as she chased butterflies and collected pretty stones. But peace, Clayton had learned, was always temporary. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late August, carried by a traveling preacher who'd lost his way trying to reach the mining camps up north. Clayton found the man watering his horse at the creek, looking haggard and uncertain. "You Clayton Thorne?" the preacher asked, mopping sweat from his brow. "Depends who's asking." The man reached into his saddlebags and withdrew an envelope, yellowed at the edges and sealed with red wax. "Woman in Denver paid me $5 to deliver this personal. Said it was important you get it before—" The preacher's voice trailed off, and Clayton's blood chilled. "Before what?" "Before she passes on, I reckon. Looked mighty poorly when I saw her. Consumption, most likely." Clayton took the envelope with hands that trembled despite his effort to keep them steady. The writing on the front was careful, feminine, achingly familiar despite the years that had passed. Clayton Thorne's Cedar Ridge territory, private and urgent. He recognized the handwriting immediately, and the recognition hit him like a physical blow. Rose, his wife, or the woman who'd once held that title before vanishing in the night 7 years ago. After the preacher left, Clayton walked to the edge of the clearing, away from the cabin where the children were playing, and broke the wax seal with fingers that shook like autumn leaves. "My dear Clayton, if this reaches you, it means I found the courage to send what I should have written years ago. I know what I did cannot be forgiven, and I do not ask for your understanding. I ask only for your compassion, for the sake of an innocent child who bears the burden of my mistakes. When I left you, I was carrying a child, not yours. I was unfaithful, and the shame of it drove me away rather than face your disappointment. I convinced myself you would be better off without knowing the truth. The child, a daughter I named May, is now 8 years old. Her father died of fever last winter, and I am not long for this world. The coughing sickness has taken hold, and the doctors say I have perhaps weeks, not months. May is alone in the world save for me, and soon she will be alone entirely. She is staying at the Sisters of Mercy Orphanage in Denver while I receive treatment, but they cannot keep her indefinitely. I know I have no right to ask anything of you after what I did. But Clayton, you always wanted to be a father, and she needs someone who will love her not for what she represents, but for who she is. A scared little girl who has lost everything. If there is any part of the man I married still in you, if there is any forgiveness left in your heart, please consider taking her in. The enclosed photograph will show you her face. With all my regrets and what love I have left to give." Rose Clayton's hand shook as he examined the small photograph tucked inside the envelope. A serious-faced little girl with dark hair and eyes that held too much sadness stared back at him. She looked nothing like Rose, nothing like him, but something in her expression, a quiet resignation that spoke of too much loss, cut straight through to his heart. A child alone in the world, a daughter even if not his blood, left behind by the woman who'd once shared his bed in his dreams. "Papa?" Lily's voice made him turn. She'd approached on silent feet, her small face creased with concern. "You look sad. What's that?" Clayton knelt to her level, tucking the photograph into his shirt pocket. "News from someone I used to know." Lily reached out and touched his cheek with one small hand. "Make you cry?" He hadn't realized tears had started. "Yeah, it does." Want Lily to make it better? The simple offer broke something loose in Clayton's chest. He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of mountain air and innocence that clung to her hair. That evening, after the children were asleep, Clayton sat by the fire reading Rose's letter again, memorizing every word. Part of him wanted to burn it, to pretend it had never arrived. He had a family now, children who called him Papa and meant it. Why complicate that with ghosts from his past? But another part of him couldn't stop thinking about a 7-year-old girl sitting in an orphanage, waiting for someone to claim her. The next morning, he made his decision. I need to go to Denver, he told Isaac as they fed the chickens together. There's someone there who needs help. Isaac looked up from scattering grain, his young face serious. What kind of someone? A little girl whose mother is dying. She doesn't have anywhere else to go. Like we didn't have anywhere to go. Yeah, like that. Isaac nodded slowly. She gonna come live with us? Maybe. Would that be all right with you? The boy was quiet for a moment, watching the chickens peck at the feed. Then, will there be enough room? Enough food? Clayton's heart ached at the question. Even now, even after months of safety, Isaac's first concern was scarcity. There's always room for one more, Clayton said firmly. Always enough love to go around. Isaac met his eyes, searching for deception and finding none. Then yeah, it'd be all right. The journey to Denver took 3 days of hard riding. Clayton made the trip alone, leaving the children in the care of Martha Henley, a practical woman who'd raised 6 children and wasn't fazed by 3 more. Denver was a sprawling, chaotic place that reminded Clayton why he preferred mountains to civilization. The Sisters of Mercy orphanage sat on the outskirts, a stern brick building that looked more like a prison than a home. Sister Margaret, the elderly nun who ran the place, received him in a sparse office that smelled of carbolic soap and disappointment. You're here about the Garrett child, she said without preamble. May, Clayton said. Her name is May. The mother passed 2 days ago. Consumption, as expected. The child hasn't spoken since we delivered the news. Clayton's chest tightened. 2 days ago, while he'd been wrestling with indecision, May had been facing the worst moment of her young life alone. I'd like to see her. Sister Margaret led him through corridors lined with dormitory rooms where children went about the business of existing without living. May sat alone in a small room at the end of the hall, staring out a window that faced a brick wall. She was smaller than her 7 years suggested, all sharp angles and hollow spaces. The dark hair from the photograph was lank and lifeless, and her charity dress made her look like a forgotten doll. May, Sister Margaret said briskly, this is Mr. Thorne. He's come to see you. The child turned slowly, and Clayton found himself looking into eyes that held a depth of loss that made his soul ache. Hello, May, Clayton said softly, kneeling to her level. Your mother wrote to me about you. For a moment, something flickered in those dark eyes. Hope, perhaps, or curiosity. Then it was gone, replaced by protective blankness. She said you might need somewhere to go, Clayton continued. Somewhere safe, with people who would care about you. May's lips moved silently, forming words she couldn't voice. Clayton reached into his pocket and withdrew something he'd carved during the ride to Denver. A small wooden horse, its mane flowing as if caught in eternal wind. I made this for someone once, he said, holding it out to her. Never got to give it to them. Thought maybe you'd like it. May stared at the carved horse for a long moment. Then slowly she reached out and took it, her small fingers tracing the smooth curves. It's beautiful, she whispered, the first words she'd spoken since her mother's death. I'm Clayton, he said. I live in the mountains with 3 other children who needed somewhere safe to call home. There's Isaac, who's 8, and Nora, who's 6, and Lily, who's 4. Are they your real children? May asked, her voice barely audible. Clayton considered the question seriously. They are now. Real doesn't always mean blood. Sometimes it just means choice. Choosing to love someone, choosing to stay, choosing to be family. May hugged the wooden horse to her chest. My mama said you were a good man before she got too sick to talk much. Your mama was a complicated person, Clayton said carefully. She made some mistakes, but she loved you. That's why she wrote to me, because she wanted to make sure you'd be safe and loved even after she couldn't take care of you anymore. Will you take care of me? The question was asked so simply, with such quiet desperation, that Clayton felt his heart break and rebuild itself in the space of a heartbeat. If you want me to, he said, if you think you could be happy living on a mountain with people who are still figuring out how to be a family. May was quiet for so long that Clayton began to think she wouldn't answer. Then she stood up, walked over to him, and placed one small hand in his much larger one. I think I'd like that, she said. The journey home took 4 days instead of 3, partly because Clayton was careful not to push May too hard, and partly because she needed time to process the magnitude of what was happening. They camped under the stars, and Clayton told her stories about the mountains, about the children she was going to meet. Will they like me? May asked on the 3rd night. They'll love you, Clayton said with certainty, because that's what families do. When they finally crested the ridge that overlooked home, Clayton saw his other children waiting on the porch, Isaac standing protective and alert, Nora clutching Lily's hand, all of them watching with the intensity of people whose happiness depended on safe returns. Papa! Lily's voice carried across the clearing as she broke free and ran toward them. Clayton dismounted and caught her up, spinning her around as she giggled. Over her head, he saw Isaac and Nora approaching cautiously, their eyes fixed on the small figure still mounted on his horse. This is May, Clayton said, helping her down. May, these are your new brother and sisters. The children studied each other with careful intensity. Then Nora stepped forward and held out her hand. I'm Nora, she said solemnly. I help Papa with the cooking. Do you know how to make biscuits? May shook her head, but for the first time since Denver, Clayton saw something like a smile ghost across her lips. That's okay, Nora said matter-of-factly. I can teach you. That night, as Clayton tucked 4 children into beds instead of 3, he felt the rightness of it settle into his bones. May had been quiet during supper, overwhelmed by the noise and chaos of a real family meal. But she'd eaten everything on her plate and even smiled when Lily told her an elaborate story about chipmunks. Papa? May's voice was barely a whisper in the darkness. Thank you for coming to get me. Thank you for letting me, Clayton replied. Is it okay if I miss my mama sometimes? Clayton's throat tightened. It's okay to miss her always. Missing people we love doesn't mean we can't love new people too. Hearts are bigger than most folks think. May was quiet for a moment. Then, Papa Clayton? Yeah, sweetheart? I think my mama would be happy that I'm here. Looking up at the loft where 4 children who'd found their way to him through loss and hope were settling into sleep, Clayton thought she was probably right. The mountain wind sang lullabies around the cabin eaves, and for the first time in years, all of Clayton's children were safe under his roof. It was enough. It was everything. 5 years later, 5 years passed like seasons changing, sometimes slow as winter honey, sometimes swift as spring meltwater rushing down the mountainside. The children grew tall and strong under Clayton's steady care, their laughter echoing through the cabin that had once known only silence. Isaac, now 13, had inherited his father's steady hands and quiet strength. He could split a cord of wood, repair a broken fence, or track a wounded deer through miles of forest without breaking stride. But it was his gentleness with his sisters that made Clayton's chest swell with pride. The way he taught May to whittle, how he never complained when Lily demanded piggyback rides. Nora, at 11, ruled the cabin's domestic realm with an iron fist wrapped in gingham aprons. She could cook a meal for 6, mend clothes that seemed beyond repair, and organize chaos into order with the efficiency of a field general. Her sharp tongue could cut down foolishness, but her hands were always gentle when tending scraped knees or fevered brows. Lily, now 9, remained the family's bright star, quick to laugh, quicker to forgive, with a spirit that couldn't be dimmed by harsh words or harder circumstances. She rode like she'd been born in the saddle, climbed trees like a squirrel, and had never met a stranger she couldn't charm into smiling. And May. May had blossomed from the hollow-eyed waif Clayton had found in Denver into a thoughtful young woman of 13. She moved through the world with quiet grace, her artist's hands always busy, sketching the view from her window, pressing flowers between book pages, or carving intricate patterns into pieces of scrap wood. The mountain had been good to them. The cabin had expanded over the years. A proper bedroom for the girls, a workshop where Clayton taught carpentry, a root cellar that stayed cool even in the hottest summers. Their few neighbors respected Clayton's privacy and his children's happiness, and the town of Cedar Ridge had come to accept the unconventional family. But peace was always temporary. The trouble started on a crisp October morning when a well-dressed woman rode up the mountain path. Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood sat stiffly in Clayton's kitchen, her traveling dress immaculate despite the long ride from town. She was perhaps 40, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, and the sort of refined bearing that spoke of Eastern education. "Mr. Thorne," she said, sipping the coffee Nora had served with automatic politeness, "I represent the Territorial Child Welfare Commission. We're conducting routine reviews of unconventional family arrangements." Clayton felt the familiar chill that came with official attention. "My children are well cared for." "Oh, I can see that," Mrs. Blackwood said, her gaze taking in the clean kitchen, the well-fed children, the obvious love that bound this household together. "But you must understand that there are certain irregularities in your situation that concern the authorities." "What kind of irregularities?" Mrs. Blackwood consulted a leather portfolio. "You're an unmarried man raising 4 children to whom you have no legal relationship. No formal adoption papers were ever filed. From a legal standpoint, these children are still wards of the state." The words hit Clayton like physical blows. "They're my children. I understand your attachment, and I can see they're attached to you as well. But attachment isn't the same as legal right, and there are concerns about their future prospects." "What concerns?" Mrs. Blackwood's expression softened slightly. "The girls particularly. They're growing into young women, but what opportunities will they have here? No proper schooling beyond what you can provide. No exposure to refined society. And the boys. Isaac shows promise, but he'll never rise above his circumstances without proper education." Clayton felt anger building in his chest. "My children are happy. They're healthy. They're loved. What more do they need?" "Opportunity, Mr. Thorne. The chance to become more than what their unfortunate beginnings would suggest." Before Clayton could respond, Isaac appeared in the kitchen doorway. The boy had grown tall and broad-shouldered, his eyes holding steady confidence. "Pa?" Isaac said, his gaze flicking between Clayton and the visitor. "Everything all right?" "Just a conversation, son," Clayton said, but Mrs. Blackwood leaned forward with sudden interest. "Isaac, isn't it? How old are you now?" 13, ma'am. "And can you read?" "Right question mark." Isaac straightened slightly, sensing challenge. "Yes, ma'am. Pa taught us all. I can cipher too, and I know my geography and history." "Impressive," Mrs. Blackwood said, making notes. "But tell me, what do you plan to do with your life? What are your ambitions?" Isaac glanced at Clayton, then back at the woman. "I plan to work the land, take care of my family, maybe expand the farm, raise some cattle, build a good life here." Mrs. Blackwood's pen scratched across her paper. "And if I told you that you could attend a proper school in Denver, learn a profession, perhaps become a lawyer or a doctor?" For a moment, Isaac was quiet, considering. Then he shook his head firmly. "This is my home, ma'am. These are my people. I don't need to see the world when I got everything I want right here." After Mrs. Blackwood left, with promises to return and ominous mentions of recommendations to the territorial governor, Clayton gathered his children around the kitchen table. "They want to take us away?" Lily asked, her voice small and frightened. "They want to separate us," Clayton said honestly. "Send you to different schools, different families. They think it would be better for your futures." "But we don't want different futures," May said quietly. "We want our future, here together." Nora crossed her arms with characteristic determination. "Let them try. I'll bite anyone who tries to take me away from my family." The conversation was interrupted by commotion outside. Horses arriving fast, voices calling out in alarm. Clayton stepped onto the porch to find Dr. Samuel Morrison dismounting from his lathered mare, his medical bag clutched in one hand. "Clayton," the doctor called. "Thank God you're here. There's been an accident in town. Mine collapsed at the Broken Creek site. They're bringing wounded up to the church, but I need help. Those children of yours, they've got steady hands and good hearts. I could use them." Clayton looked back at his children, saw them already reaching for coats and boots without being asked. When people were hurt, you helped. When the community called, you answered. The ride to town was swift and silent. The Broken Creek mine employed half the men in Cedar Ridge, and a collapse could mean widows and orphans, economic disaster for the entire region. The scene at the church was chaos. Injured miners lay on makeshift beds while Dr. Morrison worked to treat wounds and set broken bones. Wives and children crowded the pews, their faces tight with worry. "Isaac, Nora," Clayton said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Help the doctor. May, Lily, comfort the families. Help with food and water." For the next 6 hours, the Thorne family worked alongside their neighbors with quiet efficiency. Isaac held lanterns steady while Dr. Morrison sutured wounds. Nora boiled water and tore clean cloth for bandages. May sketched quick portraits of injured men to send to worried relatives. Lily held the hands of crying children, singing soft songs until their tears stopped. By dawn, the crisis had passed. 3 men were dead, 7 badly injured but expected to recover. The community would mourn its losses and care for its wounded, as mountain communities always had. Mrs. Blackwood was waiting on the church steps as they prepared to leave. She'd witnessed everything, the way Clayton's children had worked without complaint, the respect they commanded from adults, the love they showed to strangers in need. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her official demeanor notably softer, "might I have another word?" They walked away from the others, out of earshot of the children. "I came here prepared to recommend the removal of your children to more suitable arrangements," Mrs. Blackwood said. "I was convinced that isolated mountain life was no place for young people to develop proper character." Clayton waited, saying nothing. "I was wrong," she continued. "What I saw in there, those children have something that no amount of formal education can teach. They have compassion, competence, and an understanding of what it means to be part of something larger than themselves." She reached into her portfolio and withdrew several official documents. "I'm recommending that guardianship of Isaac, Nora, Lily, and May be formally granted to Clayton Thorne, with all legal rights and responsibilities thereof." Clayton felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't realized was clenched tight. "Thank you. Don't thank me, Mr. Thorne. Thank them." She nodded toward his children, who were helping elderly Mrs. Patterson into her buggy. "They're remarkable young people. You should be proud." "I am." Mrs. Blackwood smiled, the first genuine expression Clayton had seen from her. "I have one more recommendation to make." "What's that?" "The territorial government is looking for men of good character to serve as deputy marshals in remote areas. The position comes with a small salary, official recognition, and legal authority to protect citizens in your jurisdiction. Interested?" Clayton thought about Cal Brennan, about federal judges and legal documents, about all the ways the outside world had tried to tear his family apart. Having official standing might not prevent future challenges, but it would certainly help him meet them. "I might be," he said. 2 months later, Clayton Thorne was sworn in as deputy marshal for the Cedar Ridge district. The badge felt strange on his chest, heavy with responsibility and official recognition of what he'd always known, that protecting the innocent was worth any personal cost. The children adapted to their father's new role with characteristic resilience. Isaac took pride in helping with investigations that required tracking skills. Nora organized the household with military precision whenever Clayton had to travel. May sketched wanted posters with artistic flair, and Lily charmed information from reluctant witnesses with innocent questions that adults would answer honestly. But the most significant change came from within Clayton himself. The badge made him feel legitimate in ways he'd never expected, not just as a father, but as a man who contributed to something larger than his own small corner of the world. It was May who noticed first. "Pa," she said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, "you seem different lately. Happier, maybe?" Clayton considered the observation. "I reckon I am." "Why?" He was quiet for a long moment. "For a long time, I felt like I was just taking things. Taking you children from bad situations, taking happiness I didn't deserve. Now I feel like I'm giving something back, like maybe I earned the right to be your father." May leaned against his shoulder. "Pa? Yeah, sweetheart. You always deserved us, from the very first day." As the last light faded from the western peaks and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Clayton Thorne sat surrounded by his children. No longer the broken man who'd bought 3 orphans for 3 silver coins, but a father who'd found his purpose in love freely given and fiercely protected. The mountain wind sang its ancient songs around their cabin, carrying echoes of laughter and promises kept, of a family forged not by blood but by choice, not by chance but by the simple, revolutionary act of refusing to let go. 5 years later, the heart attack came without warning on a crisp February morning when Clayton was splitting wood behind the cabin. One moment he was steady on his feet, axe raised against the winter sky, and the next he was on his knees in the snow. Clutching his chest, pain radiated through his body like lightning. Isaac found him there 20 minutes later, unconscious but breathing, his weathered face gray as old ash. The boy, now a young man of 18, lifted his father with strength born of desperation and carried him inside, shouting for his sisters with a voice that cracked like breaking timber. For 3 days, Clayton drifted between waking and darkness, while Dr. Morrison came and went with increasing concern etched in his lined face. The children took turns sitting beside their father's bed, holding his hand, whispering stories and memories into the silence. It was Nora who was with him when he finally opened his eyes, her 16-year-old face streaked with tears she tried so hard not to shed. "Pa," she whispered, leaning forward eagerly. "Can you hear me?" Clayton's throat felt raw, his voice coming out rough as sandpaper. "Still here, little one." Relief flooded her features, but it was tempered by something else, a gravity that seemed too heavy for her young shoulders. "The doctor says, he says your heart is damaged, says you need to take things easy from now on." Clayton tried to sit up, but his body betrayed him, weakness flooding his limbs like water. "How easy? No more wood splitting, no more long rides, no more—" Her voice broke. "No more being the strong one, all the time." The words hit harder than the heart attack had. For 12 years, Clayton had been the rock upon which this family was built. Provider, protector, the steady presence that made their world feel safe. The thought of becoming a burden to the children who'd given his life meaning made his damaged heart ache in ways that had nothing to do with medicine. Over the following weeks, as spring slowly claimed the mountain from winter's grip, Clayton learned the humbling lesson of accepting help instead of giving it. Isaac took over the heavy work without complaint, his young hands already skilled enough to maintain the cabin and care for the livestock. Nora managed the household with efficiency that would have made any mother proud, while Lily and May handled the daily tasks that kept life moving forward. But it was the careful way they all watched him that cut deepest. The pause before asking him to reach something on a high shelf. The quick exchange of glances when he climbed the stairs too slowly. The unspoken agreement to handle problems themselves rather than burden him with worry. "I'm not dying yet," he told them one evening as they sat around the dinner table, the weight of their concern thick as smoke in the air. "We know, Pa," Isaac said, but his eyes held shadows that spoke of a future none of them wanted to contemplate. That's when the letter arrived, another envelope bearing the seal of the territorial capital and addressed in official script that made Clayton's chest tighten with familiar dread. The letter was from Governor Bradford himself. "Mr. Thorne, your exemplary service as deputy marshal has not gone unnoticed. Recent federal legislation has created new opportunities for experienced lawmen to serve in expanded capacities. I am pleased to offer you the position of regional deputy marshal, overseeing law enforcement for a 3-county area. The position comes with a substantial increase in salary, a house in the territorial capital, and educational opportunities for your dependents at the finest schools. Given your family's circumstances, I believe this appointment would provide the legitimacy and resources necessary to ensure their continued welfare and advancement. Please consider this offer carefully. A man of your caliber should not be confined to a single mountain settlement when he could serve the greater good. Respectfully yours, Governor Marcus Bradford." Clayton read the letter twice, then set it aside and stared into the fire. The position was everything he could have dreamed of years ago. Respect, security, a future that would give his children advantages he could never provide on the mountain. But it would also mean leaving the place where they'd become a family, abandoning the life they'd built together for the promise of something greater in the eyes of the world. "What's it say, Pa?" May asked, settling beside his chair with quiet grace. Clayton handed her the letter and watched her dark eyes scan the official words. Her expression remained carefully neutral, but he saw the slight tightening around her eyes. "It's a good opportunity," she said finally. "But—" May was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. "But opportunities aren't always the same as blessings, and sometimes what looks like advancement is really just a prettier cage." That night, Clayton lay awake listening to the mountain winds sing through the pines, the same song that had welcomed him home 13 years ago when he'd first carried 3 frightened children up this trail. His heart stuttered occasionally, reminding him of its fragility, but his mind was clear. In the morning, he gathered his children around the kitchen table, where so many important conversations had taken place. "I've been thinking about the governor's offer," he began, studying each beloved face. "It would mean leaving here, moving to the capital, starting over in a place where everything is different." Isaac leaned forward, his young face serious. "What do you want to do, Pa?" "That's not the right question, son. The question is, what do we want to do? This family was built on choices, yours as much as mine, and this choice belongs to all of us." For the next hour, they talked through the possibilities, the advantages of city life, better schools, social opportunities that the mountain couldn't provide, but also the costs, leaving the land that had shaped them, abandoning the community that had accepted them, trading the freedom of their mountain home for the constraints of society's expectations. It was Lily who spoke the truth they'd all been dancing around. "Pa," she said, her 14-year-old voice carrying wisdom that seemed decades older. "We don't need the world to think we're legitimate. We already know who we are." Nora nodded firmly. "This is our home. These mountains, this cabin, they're part of us now. We can't just pack them up and take them with us." May looked around the room, her artist's eyes taking in every detail. "All my best work comes from here. The light, the seasons, the way the snow looks on the peaks. I don't think I could create the same things anywhere else." Isaac was quiet the longest, wrestling with the weight of decision. Finally, he spoke. "Pa, you taught us that family isn't about what other people think or what looks good on paper. It's about being together, taking care of each other, building something that matters. We've already got that here." Clayton felt his chest tighten with emotion that had nothing to do with his damaged heart. "You sure?" "All of you, because this might be our only chance to—" "Pa," Lily interrupted, moving to stand beside his chair. "Do you remember what you told us that first night? About the mountain not giving second chances easily?" He nodded. "Well, it gave us one. It gave us you, and it gave us each other. Why would we turn our backs on that now?" Clayton reached for pen and paper, his hands steady as he wrote his response to the governor. 3 lines, simple and clear. "Thank you for your confidence in my abilities. However, my family and I have decided to remain where we are. We have everything we need right here. Respectfully, Clayton Thorne, Deputy Marshal, Cedar Ridge District." As he sealed the letter, Clayton felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. The children were right. They'd found their place in the world, carved out their own corner of happiness and purpose. No amount of money or prestige could improve on what they'd built together. That spring, as Clayton's strength slowly returned and his heart learned to beat with less urgency, the family settled into a new rhythm. Isaac took on more responsibility for the heavy work, but he did it as a partner rather than a replacement. Nora continued to manage the household with gentle efficiency, but she also began teaching younger children in town, sharing the education Clayton had given her. May's artwork caught the attention of a traveling art dealer who offered to represent her work in Denver and beyond. But she chose to stay, documenting the life and people of the mountains with brushes and pencils that captured more than photographs ever could. And Lily bloomed into a young woman who could charm information from the most tight-lipped witness and track a fugitive through terrain that would challenge seasoned lawmen. She became Clayton's unofficial deputy, handling cases that required a lighter touch than his gruff demeanor could provide. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of fire and gold, Clayton felt a profound sense of completion. Not the bitter resignation of a man facing death, but the deep satisfaction of a life fully lived. "Pa," May said, her voice soft in the gathering dusk. "Do you ever regret it? Not taking the governor's offer, I mean." Clayton looked around at his children. No longer children, really, but young adults who'd chosen to build their lives around the foundation he'd provided. Isaac, steady and strong, already talking about building his own cabin just over the ridge. Nora, nurturing and wise, becoming the heart of the community in ways that went far beyond her years. Lily, fierce and loyal, growing into a woman who would protect the innocent as fiercely as he'd protected her. And May, quiet and thoughtful, finding ways to share their story with a world that needed to know such families were possible. "No," he said finally, "I don't regret it at all. We made the right choice." "How do you know?" Lily asked. Clayton smiled, his weathered face creasing with lines earned through years of laughter and love. "Because when you love someone, really love them, you don't try to make them into something they're not. You help them become the best version of who they already are. And look at you all. Look at what you've become." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky and the mountain wind sang its ancient songs around their cabin, Clayton Thorne closed his eyes and listened to the sound of his children's voices weaving together in comfortable conversation. His heart might be damaged, his time on Earth perhaps shorter than he'd hoped, but his legacy was secured, not in badges or official recognition or positions of power, but in four remarkable human beings who'd learned that family is a choice you make every day, that love is something you build rather than find, and that sometimes the greatest adventures happen not in distant places, but in the simple act of creating a home where broken hearts can heal and lost souls can finally belong. The mountain had given them their second chance, and they'd made the most of it, together. 10 years later, 10 years passed like turning pages in a cherished book. The children grew into remarkable adults under Clayton's guidance, their laughter still echoing through the cabin that had become something larger than any of them had dared to imagine. Isaac, now 28, had built his homestead over the ridge and married Sarah Henderson. Their son, named Clayton, gurgled in the cradle Isaac carved with his own hands. Nora became the region's beloved healer, her clinic bearing a simple sign, N. Thorne, Physician. At 26, she had dedicated her life to healing others. Lily wore her deputy badge with quiet pride at 24, tracking criminals across 3 territories. And May, now 23, captured their mountain life in drawings that grace magazines nationwide, documenting how love could transform broken souls. It was May who found Clayton that autumn morning, sitting peacefully on the porch with a half-finished wooden horse in his lap and a smile on his weathered face. He'd been watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold, the same view that had welcomed him home with 3 frightened children so many years ago. Dr. Morrison confirmed what they knew in their hearts. Clayton had passed quietly in his sleep, his damaged heart finally finding the rest it had earned through decades of fierce love and protection. They buried him beneath the tall pine where he'd taught them to track, climb, and dream. The headstone was simple granite. Clayton Thorne, 1825 to 1897. Beloved father, he made us a family. The funeral drew people from across the territory. Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood, now elderly, spoke the words that captured his essence. Clayton Thorne proved that love isn't just enough. It's everything. It's the foundation upon which all virtues are built, the soil where hope grows, the light that guides lost souls home. Among his possessions, they found a journal spanning 25 years, documenting not dramatic events but small moments that mattered most. Isaac said his first prayer tonight, thanking God for warm soup and a safe bed. Nora spent hours nursing a bird with a broken wing. She has the healer's heart. Lily asked why some don't have families. I said everyone has family somewhere. Some just haven't found them yet. May drew us around the dinner table, light streaming through windows, but the real light came from our faces when we're together. Isaac would teach his son that family is built by choice, not blood. Nora would heal the sick with hands that learned gentleness from a mountain man who chose love over loneliness. Lily would protect the innocent as the territory's first female sheriff, and May would write their story, The Mountain Man's Children, proving that families are forged in the fires of daily choice and ordinary devotion. Years later, when people spoke of the mountain man who raised 4 orphans, they'd argue about details. But those who knew the truth would smile and set the record straight. Clayton Thorne wasn't a saint. He was something better. A father who chose to love when loving seemed impossible, who built a family from broken pieces of other people's tragedies, who proved that the most ordinary miracles are often the most extraordinary. The mountain wind still sings around their cabin, now a small museum telling the story of frontier families and the courage required to love without guarantee. Clayton's great-grandchildren play in the same clearing where he once taught their grandfather to split wood, learning the same lessons about love and the strange magic that happens when people choose to care for each other. 3 silver coins changed 4 lives forever, but it was love, stubborn, fierce, freely given love, that transformed them into something the broken world desperately needed. Proof that families are possible, healing can happen, and sometimes the best way to find yourself is to give yourself away to someone who needs you even more. The story ends, but the love continues. In every adoption finalized, every foster child welcomed, every broken family mended by people who refuse to believe that blood is the only bond that matters. Clayton Thorne's legacy lives on. Families are not born but made, not found but forged, not defined by blood, but by the simple revolutionary act of choosing to love.